probably if everybody is on this webinar, you're probably all accustomed to getting a lot of emails from me at this point. We have two speakers today who are involved in firewood banks in various ways, from the supply side, the organizational side, the processing side, lots of different sides. But they have a lot of knowledge to share from their experiences and are also, I believe, ready to answer questions that you might have. And so as they speak, feel free to type questions into the Q&A box or into the chat, and we will do our best to get those answered. And as we start, I'd love for those in attendance to introduce themselves in the chat, your name, where you call home, so we can all get a sense of who else is here in this room, in this virtual room. This webinar will be recorded, so you can refer back to what you've heard or pass on the recording to others who are interested. And if you are interested in checking out some other recordings we've done, I'm going to post a few links to a past webinar, as well as to the National Firewood Bank Summit we held in September that included a session with Lee Greenwood, who on wood sourcing and forest health. And Lee Greenwood is the head of the Don't Move Firewood campaign program through the Nature Conservancy. And that might interest everyone here. So I'll throw those in the chat in a second. And all right, we've got some introductions in the chat already here. So I'd like to start our webinar with an acknowledgement. We honor with gratitude the Indigenous peoples whose ancestral homelands all firewood banks occupy. We will continue to work as allies toward Indigenous community access and self-determination and natural resource management on these lands. And thank you to the authors of this land acknowledgement, Rick Harper, Clarice Hart, Jay Dampier, and Eric Griffith, who are the authors of a recent paper about wood banks across the country, partly titled Food, Medicine, or Heat, which is a great overview of different wood banks. And so one of the questions our speakers can be ready for, but I'll start out with, that we got from people registering for this webinar was, what is a firewood bank? So very basically, a firewood bank is emergency heating assistance in the form of firewood, usually given out free or at a discount to wood bank users, often using volunteer labor to process and distribute the wood. And so that's with a basic definition. I would love to turn it over to our speakers today. We have Jake Dahlin from the U.S. Forest Service and Sean Mahoney from the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation. And Jake, I'll have you start us off, and please go ahead and introduce yourself as you would like.
Cool, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Well, thank you.
Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jake Dahlin. I am the district timber staff on the Flagstaff Ranger District, Coconino National Forest. A little bit about me. I'm originally from upstate New York. I've been out west since 2007. Worked for the Forest Service all across the Northern Rockies down through the Interior Kingdom, and now here in Flagstaff, Arizona. I recently had shoulder surgery, so I have a sling on, if anybody's wondering what's going on there. And I will be completely honest, before I took this job in Arizona, I didn't think that there was going to be a forest here. I figured it was all warm and hot and cactus. But there actually is the largest contiguous ponderosa pine stand in the world, here at 7,000 feet in Flagstaff. So several years ago, well, let's see, I'm just going to kick off this presentation. It's about Wood for Life, which is a partnership here in Northern Arizona and the Four Corners region of the Southwest. Let's see. Yep, a little bit about me. Again, work for the Forest Service on the Coconino National Forest. So overview of the Wood for Life program. This is a partnership that was developed by several different groups of people throughout Northern Arizona originally, to try to help provide wood from forest restoration projects to our partners on the Navajo Nation and on the Hopi Nation, as well as some other surrounding indigenous communities. In the Southwest, we have a real issue with wildfire. Additionally, we have very little industry for small diameter, low value timber. So when I first got here, we had a lot of timber sales and a lot of forest restoration projects that were going on, and we had no way to get rid of the wood. We've had log decks all over the forest. A common practice here, throughout the Forest Service, is to, when you're doing hand thinning projects, you pile all the wood and you wait until the wintertime, snow comes, you burn the hand piles. And then with like traditional timber sales, after all the logs are cut and they're decked, they're processed, all of the slash and non-utilized material is provided in these large machine piles, which also are burned when weather permits. Over the course of the last several years, we've had instances throughout the Southwest, particularly in New Mexico, where you'd light these piles on fire in, say, January under several feet of snow, and then come May or June, that heat and the coals and everything exist underneath the ground and the dust, and they start back up and you have wildfire. So I know that we here on the Coconino, we had 2 instances where this happened. So we were trying to figure out how to deal with that. At the same time, in 2019, the Navajo Generating Station and the Peabody Coal Mine in Kayenta on the Navajo Nation closed down. And this coal mine provided the vast majority of a heating source for Navajo and Hopi people. So they went from having, their main heat source to being, without anything and no idea, they don't have electricity. There's roughly 15,000 homes on Navajo without electricity. So we started getting a lot of calls from people asking for firewood. This wasn't their traditional main way of heating their homes, but they had stoves that burned coal, which in turn could burn firewood. So we were like, okay, well, the obvious thing here is we've got all this extra wood. Now we've just got to figure out a way to provide that to our tribal partners. At the same time, culture in the Forest Service is to utilize timber and trees in the most effective way possible. And usually that looks like dimensional timber, right? You want to put it out as 2x4s or 4x4s, truly try to maximize the value of that wood. And at the time, firewood really didn't, a lot of people just thought it was sin to be taking perfectly good trees that could be turned into boards and provided for firewood. Additionally, federal policy doesn't allow us or constrains us significantly on giving wood away for free. So right off the bat, we were like, people need this wood. They're dying of exposure. We've got all this wood that we can't get rid of, but we've got all these rules and laws in place that are preventing us from getting it to them. Like I alluded to, so we have all sorts of fuels reduction projects that we're implementing. A lot of this wood isn't very valuable, so we have to pay loggers and pay people to do the work. Which this is cut, skid, and deck projects, and they don't take the wood off the ground. So one of the ways we kind of dealt with this federal policy was working with our partners to go into agreements where we basically pay our partners. I'll use the National Forest Foundation, for example. We go into an agreement with the National Forest Foundation where we put into the agreement X amount of money to implement the projects. They purchase the wood from us for very cheap, next to nothing. And now that wood is theirs to give away. We've worked with the Nature Conservancy on projects like this. Multiple volunteer groups and non-for-profits have kind of built up out of this, out of the need for this wood. So we're really starting to get creative with our partners on how to get this wood off the Forest Service land and in the homes of people throughout the reservations. So as you can see, this takes it takes a village. It takes everybody to help out to try to get this wood from point A to point B, and truly there are several different style projects that we utilize to get this wood off the ground and onto the reservation. So it's not like one size fits all. In the beginning when we were getting these calls of people, basically dying from exposure, I drove around the forest looking for projects that occurred over the last couple of years that we could essentially get the wood off the ground. And so that was kind of how it started. We're in year 3, year 4 right now. So we're starting to really truly plan out and build projects specifically around being able to provide that wood to the tribes. So yeah, it's really, really, really growing. It's taking a lot of different shapes, a lot of different partners. It is now, it's starting to spread throughout the West, as we'll see here. Sorry. So this is one of the non-for-profits that we work with that came off the Navajo Nation. They're called Chits for Che, which translates to Wood for Grandfather. My apologies, I don't know what's going on with the PowerPoint here. So a lot of times what we will do is identify a project that has wood available in piles or in some way, shape, or form, and we'll work with, in this instance, Chits for Che, and we'll identify that, give them that project area, get them the necessary permits required to remove that wood, and then they'll go cut it, split it, and deliver it to different chapter houses and villages throughout Navajo and Hopi. I mentioned earlier about utilizing these agreements. They're referred to as supplemental project agreements. And it's just us going under contract with whatever partner that is. We provide funding, they provide funding, and then they can implement the projects. And that's worked very good. We've got 3 or 4 different agreements going on here right now on the Flagstaff Ranger District. And it's really starting to spread throughout the West. When the bipartisan infrastructure law came out, we were kind of tipped off that there was some provisions specifically in there that provided like $100 million to work that would go to forest restoration activities that was implemented by native youth or veteran-based crews, and then provided like a non-traditional product, so firewood. So we were able to apply for several $1 million. I think the Coconino did about $6.5 million, and the San Juan National Forest up in southern Colorado did around $4.5 million. We did a joint cross-regional application, and we were awarded it. And so now, over the course of the next 5 years, we can employ these native youth crews that go out and learn trades, learn how to put together logistics, put together distribution events. It covers a lot of different stuff, but they're also able to plan ahead, right? We know we're going to have X amount of money a year for the next 5 years, and we're going to get a lot of good work done. Yep. So like I had mentioned, we've got types of projects that are just your standard hand thin project, couple hundred acres here or there with good location to the roads, so we can have people pull the logs to the roads. We've got projects that are thinning in heritage sites or culturally sensitive sites that removes the fuel from those areas. And then we've got, large scale timber sales where, the saw timber or certain size wood is going to we pay for it to get processed into firewood, and then shipped out to, I think the one project we have, it distributes it to 13 different wood banks throughout Navajo and Hopi. The San Juan National Forest, they have projects where same type of thing, wood from up to 9 inches. There's no industry for it. There's no market. So they just have these log decks scattered throughout the forest, and where they pay to have it shipped via long logs out to different chapter houses on Navajo, mostly the Chinle chapter house, which they have a very robust wood bank. They've got a full-time youth crew of like 7 to 12 kids. But that's what they do. They work to cut the wood up, split it up, deliver it to vulnerable populations throughout their central agency. Yeah, and then again, creativity just kind of continues to wind. We have a project up on the Columbine Ranger District where the loggers merchandising essentially their wood right at the landing. So the butt, they cut like the first 1 to 2 feet off the bottom of the log where it's rotten or it's checked, and then all that just stays in a pile. And then we work with different non-for-profit groups or different chapter houses where we tell them, hey, here's a map, here's the location, here's an estimated amount of cordage, here's your permits, and you guys can work to get all that wood off the forest over the course of the next several weeks. We had our first cross-regional field trip this year that the National Forest Foundation put together. So we had people from all over the West coming out to look at projects very specific to just us. So we've got hand-thin projects, we've got the cut, skid, and deck project, and just really answering a lot of questions, having people, learn what other wood banks are doing, what works, what doesn't work. So I think we have 6 or 7 different states, and I think maybe 8 different national forests that have active Wood for Life programs on it. They're funded federally by the Forest Service. The BIA just put out some grants to us to help pay for help. Yeah, and we've got people coming online over the course of the next couple of years. It's building a lot of steam. So as you can imagine, so this is a picture of the Four Corners region, or a map of the Four Corners region. The stuff in kind of that brighter green, those are all national forests, and that the tan stuff, those are all tribal lands. So Navajo Nation, I think, is the largest or one of the largest reservations throughout the country. So you can see why this project makes sense, right? It's the reservations are central to the Four Corners, and then you can see Flagstaff here in the Southwest, but we're all in close proximity to those reservations in those different areas. And so, it just makes sense that we start planning. And one of the things that we're working with the Ecological Restoration Institute right now from Northern Arizona University is basically creating a map that looks like this. They're doing what's called a needs assessment, where they're going out to 13 different chapter houses, and a chapter house is just like a village or a specific place that identifies a certain town or village. And asking a series of questions, and we're basically trying to understand what the need is. Like how many houses burn firewood? How many cords does each house need? How many people exist in these houses? Who have vehicles? Who don't have vehicles? There's a whole bunch of questions so that we can essentially build a map that has all of that information on here, and that all the forests in this region can use that. And we'll also be able to populate this map to show how much wood has been provided at different areas. So we have like the Chinle chapter house. If we know that we've given them, 5,000 cords of wood this year, and they've distributed say 3,000, we know that they need 8,000, we'll be able to kind of plan all of our distribution events, and as well as other national forests can use this to kind of see, okay, Flagstaff's work in this area, Durango, you're going to do the Farmington area, Apache Sickreeds, you guys will work that Window Rock area. And so we won't be kind of crossing streams. Everyone will be able to distribute the wood as effectively as possible. So that's kind of like the long-term plans and desires to help build this wood, this program as effectively as we can. The question always comes up about sustainability and like, does the forest truly have all that wood? Like, can we provide for the long term? And the answer is no, right? This isn't the solution to the problem. And they'll tell you that we have a heating crisis because we have a housing crisis, and a lot of the homes there just are not efficient. And so the idea is as we're providing this wood for free, they can be working on, increasing the efficiencies of their homes, saving money to get that stuff implemented. It could be, saving up to put in solar, or saving up to put in turbines, or whatever their need is or desire is for the future. Because this right now, we've got projects planned, that can take us out at least 10 years, probably doing around 10,000 cords a year for 10 years. But we don't know if the funding is always going to be there. We don't know what transportation's like. The transportation is definitely the most difficult part of this whole project. Yeah, so that's kind of what the goal is. That is the Wood for Life program / partnership. I think I'm a little over 15 minutes, but any questions?
We've got one couple of quick questions, I think. I think one about cooperation, if any tribe or any community can work with you, and how they start up a partnership, and then also about transportation, about the length of transportation, how far the wood can travel.
Cool. So yeah, we have a website that we can get put in the chat that basically has like a request form, and it has points of contact where you can reach out to people from Ancestral Lands, which is the youth corps or the youth crew that we work with. You can reach out to the National Forest Foundation. You can reach out to myself for all ways of getting involved in the program. We have meetings the first Wednesday of every month, where it's like the Southwest Wood for Life kind of update for the month, where everyone kind of gets involved. And it's kind of like a twofold meeting. First part being who needs wood or who has wood. So if a new chapter or a new village is coming on and wants to get involved, they can come to this meeting and say, hey, Denny Hotso, I'm so-and-so from Denny Hotso village. We want to get involved. We need, roughly X amount of wood. And that's kind of how we start. It's a big networking session, and that's kind of how we start, pairing A with B, or, does it make the most sense for the certain group to work with the Dolores Ranger District up in Colorado, or are they closest to Flagstaff? Because really, again, that's the hardest part, is the distribution. And so right now, I think 3 hours one way is kind of where we're our limits, or where we try to stay at or under. And so basically, in a lot of these projects, especially the larger ones, we're able to have, essentially 18-wheeler trucks filled up with processed wood, anywhere from 6 to 12 cords, 18 cords, I think one of the configurations has. And then they'll do 2 of those runs a day, and they are just kind of keeping track of where they're bringing that wood. And we just kind of rotate around through those 10 to 15 different chapter houses and villages and areas. And so, yeah, and then we have, again, different size projects. And so if it's a group of people that all have pickup trucks and trailers, there's 10 different people, and they want to come get wood to help, split and provide to elders and veterans in certain areas. We have those happen too. And we just connect them with a project where we've got an excess of wood, and they come get it.
Nice. It looks like we have another question from Ed about getting a group signed up in the Gallup area, and it looks like he's got specific questions for you.
Yeah, I can put my name, my email, my number in the chat, and if you want to just shoot me an email, and we can begin the process.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jake. I'm sure that people will have more questions as we go on, and we'll have time after at the very end of the webinar too. If anybody thinks of questions as we go, please feel free to type them into the chat or into the Q&A box, and we'll get to those at the end. Thank you very much for that presentation, though. That's amazing work. And Sean, we'll pass it over to you. Would you like to introduce yourself? And
sure. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Great. So I'm Sean Mahoney. I'm a forest products specialist based in Massachusetts, and I have I think now we're up to 6 or 7 municipalities that I work with to support the development of wood banks on. And we started really small back in 2014, and have grown from there. I think we started with 4 cords our first year. Now we're up to 60, and looking toward the future of breaking over to 300. So kind of a very small scale view, and very much a New England Northeast view. I really appreciate some of the prompting questions to have in this discussion of how do you get the wood to show up? How do you get the truck to show up to get wood to your wood bank? And for us in Massachusetts, where I operate, we have been really successful at getting wood to show up mostly from utility work. And because we're in a pretty dense area surrounded by forest, every time the wind blows, there'll be wood coming down that's impacting utilities, roadways, and there's a lot of work being done now to reduce the amount of conflicts between trees and power lines and trees and roads. So that's been a great source of wood. And I have to say that if you can get linked into it, there's some challenges, but also it's an opportunity to get access to material and have log trucks show up at the yards and deliver wood. Some of the questions I'll kind of get into, the thought of hardwood versus softwood wood for firewood for logs. I found in New England and in Massachusetts in particular, we have a bit of a stigma against using softwood. I think it's just some cultural differences and also just differences in technology between older stoves and modern stoves, that you're not going to get a lot of creosote buildup because you burn pretty hot. And so we're trying to break through that, but it's a challenge when you're a wood bank, because I think we have a real sense of wanting to provide the highest quality product to the end user, the recipient. And that's just in terms of respect for them. And so we don't want to be in a place where we're seen as using a lesser quality wood than someone would be getting on the open market. And so what we try to do is do mostly hardwood, and then occasionally there's some softwood that gets mixed in, some mostly eastern white pine. And we just try to blend it into the loads. The challenge with working with utility wood, especially roadside utility wood, is that you get a mix of sizes. And so for wood banks, it's challenging to deal with the sizes. And you can try to be a little bit picky, but to get the trucks showing up consistently, we just have to put up with it. And so the kind of two tail ends of things that are headaches are brush on one side, so sticks and twigs and poorly trimmed things. And then anything over, 28, 30 inches, the oversized wood is another challenge that comes in there. And I think a solution to that is just understanding where the wood bank fits in at least in our structure, a municipal wood waste management system. And so a wood bank is there to skim off material for a beneficial use before it goes into the mulch pile to come have a tub grinder or chute grinder come in and grind it up. And so before wood banks existed in Massachusetts, all that wood would get centralized to a yard. They would wait, and then every couple of years, the town would pay for the expense of grinding that all up into mulch and getting rid of it. And so now we have this opportunity to skim off the material and get this higher beneficial use out of it. The challenge becomes managing inventory to make that happen. And I think a good rule of thumb that we found successful here is that you want to think about rotating that log inventory every 2 years, because after that we start growing too many mushrooms, and so it's not great to hold on to that wood longer than that. And all of the wood that comes in is green. In Massachusetts, it rains a lot, it's wet, and so we really need to take that. There's not really an ability to dry that wood in log form. It has to be split, it has to be put under cover. We have to get airflow around it to dry up. In dealing with this material, the other thing that I'd say is that log trucks are a huge advantage in that they can come and deliver wood. They're also somewhat challenging in that they can make really tall piles. And so if you have a volunteer group that's there with splitters and not a lot of equipment, and you have a pile that's 20 feet tall because the crane can put it up that tall, that's a huge safety concern. So a lot of times the wood bank coordinators or the tree wardens, I'll get into what a tree warden is in a minute, they'll have that conversation with the operators that are contracting and with the utility and doing the work of delivering the wood, just to make sure that the piles are low to the ground. In Massachusetts, we have kind of two structures here. One is the utility right-of-ways, the other one is our roadsides, and all of our local roadsides are administered or looked over by what we call a tree warden in Massachusetts. And so this is an elected official in communities. It's usually, it could be a member of the DPW or it could be kind of an independent person. and they typically have a small budget that they contract with haulers and arborists for that removal, and they can kind of specify that would be dropped off at the wood bank. A lot of arborist companies like having a close by place to put wood so that they don't have to haul it to their yard or haul it to a disposal facility. So it's a big advantage for them to get it dropped off at the wood bank yard. And the key to having them show up consistently and to keeping a nice clean yard is to have really good truck access. And what we've found is a successful place for that in kind of an occupied landscape where you do have pretty dense housing is that there's usually municipal space, whether it's extra space at a DPW garage, or in most cases, we've been successful with transfer stations, former capped landfills. So there's usually some space around that a former landfill that can be repurposed with support of the town and regulators, and so we can use that space as a landing zone for wood. And it provides some dividends in that a lot of times communities didn't think that wood waste was an issue. They just kind of pushed it in the background. And by setting up that yard where they can see what they have, we can start adding value to that, to the point where all of a sudden you start seeing the firewood come out, but then you start seeing, oh, you have some saw logs in that pile. And is there a higher and better use than putting in the mulch grinder? I would say, the challenge with there's kind of a challenge with working with urban wood. Size is one of them. The other thing is just you do get metal. A lot of times we'll see trees that are cabled, and it's just in a watchful eye of the person operating the chainsaw to look for some of that stuff. Most of the metal isn't bad. The thing you'll miss is the nails in the lower end of the logs. But if you can roll a log before you start bucking, that's helpful. And the easy things to spot are the cables that are put in trees sometimes in the upper limbs, just to keep that branch from failing and supporting the tree. We just buck them out with a pretty good distance on either side of that to be safe, and that just gets thrown in the scrap metal pile. The material that we deal with, it's interesting to see. So depending on what's going on in the forest will be reflected in what's going on into the wood pile. And so when I started, we saw a lot of roadside sugar maples that were suffering from decline, largely because large age, but also the roots getting affected by road salt. And so there was a lot of that material in. Makes great firewood. Not the easiest to buck or to split, but pretty much the highest density wood we have available in the state. And then transitioned as emerald ash borer came through to mostly ash is what we're seeing coming in, with also a mix of red oak from spongy moth. So every time we have kind of a smattering of forest health outbreaks, and as they're coming through, you see that wood start to show up at the wood bank, and it's nice to kind of see that wood get utilized in a way that's beneficial to a community. And lastly, I just kind of put that where wood banks sit in fuel assistance is something to know. I think people are kind of curious about how do you start a wood bank, and I see wood banks, at least where we are, is really independent from the whole National Fuel Assistance Program, your LIHEAP, Low Income Heating Assistance Program, and Energy Assistance Programs, because where we are, the need is so great that of the people that are eligible for fuel assistance just based on income, only 20% of the people actually get a benefit. And in times there can be long wait lines for that benefit. And even the people that do, that's not enough to get you through the winter. So we see wood banks operating as kind of supplementing that work. And that's where they can really excel and be nimble and flexible. So that's about what I have. I'm happy to answer questions about the utility wood. And I would say that as we're collecting that, it blossoms into something bigger. So we do a lot of roadside wood, but we're having some conversations right now about, utility, large transmission line work, and how can we absorb that? And that gives us an opportunity to be a little more picky with the sizes so we can automate a bit of the process. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It looks like there why don't we all come back here?
Oh, and I would say, John
Oh, yeah.
asked a question about distance for travel, right? And so we have Jake's experience with like 3 hours for trucking. We're like in the like under 30 minutes. If we have to drive more than 30 minutes for wood or for distribution, that's kind of pushing. We'd rather have a new yard set up because of just the density that we're in. So we're quite lucky with that that respect. It's short distances, and most of the challenges around labor and trucking time, unloading, how many trips you can make a day, kind of thing. But my hat's off to people that are trucking that far. Yeah, different perspective.
Yeah, I love the different perspectives here. That's one of the fun things about hearing from various wood banks and various people who work in different parts of it. Great. Thank you so much. We have a few questions coming in the Q&A box and in the chat, and please, everybody who's on, which is over 20 people, so we've got a good crew here. Please feel free to keep on asking questions as we talk here. So one question that either of you can address, and I think the answer basically is yes, is from one attendee who asks, is most of the wood sourced for firewood banks waste trees or otherwise planned to come down unrelated to a firewood bank's existence? And I'm sure it depends on the wood bank, because I know there are some that buy log length firewood. But do either of you want to address that a little bit?
Yeah, I can go first. So we have we call them hazardous trees, but they're trees that represent a hazard to the public, and so they could fail in a storm and cut out a utility line, or they could fall, and hurt someone's house, or block a road. And so they have to go out for another reason, and usually they have an issue where there's decline or poor form. So that's a little bit of a challenge, because you get one, misdemeanor species, but also two, there may be rot or defect in there that you have to merchandise out.
Yeah, I would echo what Sean's saying. I know, like, we deal with a lot of utility wood, a lot of wood from DOT, transportation, and like we have a specific area for the Arizona Department of Transportation where they just bring their wood throughout the year and just dump it, and people just constantly are grabbing it. That there's a comment about green wood, and the difficulties behind it, and that's one thing that we're definitely trying to change, the mentality or adjust culture with that. Right now, a lot of the wood that we have is green, and it's just not going to be available to burn this year, and so we're trying to just educate folks and tell folks that, we need to switch the firewood season to springtime and not, fall, and get that stuff in spring, get it split, and start getting, your personal wood bank at your house, up. You should be 1, 2 years ahead, 3 years ahead. And so that's really what we're trying to just educate folks on. And the realities, at least here, I feel like are just that it never was possible. Wood wasn't available that much. And now that we're significantly flooding the market with available wood, we're just hoping that people will start doing that. And I mean, they're kind of being forced to, because the wood just won't burn. So now we have projects where wood was cut this year, it's back behind a lock gate. We're going to let it winter, and cure over the winter time. And we're just going to kind of force a reset of that, of the firewood collection season, if you want to call it that. But it is very difficult, and there is just so many different ways that this wood comes available. Out west here, we have ponderosa pine, which is, Sean talked about how pine is it's not the desired species. Here we only have like pine, juniper, and a little bit of oak, but oak is a very sensitive species, and that's what everyone wants. And we just can't deal with it. So we're also working with this a nonprofit called Red Feather Development Group, who specialize in educating people about keeping clean firewood, clean stoves, HIPAA filters, dealing with how to outfit your home to make it so you're not poisoning yourself by burning all of this stuff, specifically that softwood like pine. So it is I learn something new every day for sure.
Yeah, and I would add, we have wood banks that they only do dry firewood, and it's tough because everyone sees the wood sitting there and they're going, why isn't it going out? And it's an education moment, but it's also it puts managers of the wood bank in a difficult spot, and I don't envy them for dealing with it. But it really shows dividends when that wood's ready to go, and we're always trying to get ahead to the point that we're not scrambling to get wood processed. And yeah, I mean, a lot of that happens at the house, and I think EPA Burnwise has some great resources for folks on trying to dry your wood sooner rather than later. And the point that Jake made earlier, we've done some research on the load need that we have here. We need about 50 cords per community per year to make a dent on that, and that works out to, we could serve up to, in rural Massachusetts, we could serve 5,000 households. And each one of those households to be fully fitted out, from EIA is like 2.6 cords a year. So, it just kind of gives you a sense of how much wood you need to get. Right now, most of our wood banks deliver in half cord, 1 cord increments to folks and try to spread that out as best they can, but we'd always love to grow that. But I think knowing how much wood you're burning every year gives you a sense of how big your shed needs to be. How do you need to plan for managing that material flow? Yeah.
There's another question on the same topic that you were discussing about stove safety and that sort of thing. And are there organizations that you all work for as a someone who works with a state government and on a national level as well, federal government, with stove replacements or repair, weatherization, that kind of work? I know it's a little bit off the topic of wood sourcing, but related.
Yeah, I think it's very local specific. I think there are some great national efforts that are out there, and so if folks are interested, I would certainly look at some of the great resources at the Wood Bank's website that we all know. And EPA has some great resources. We have run change out programs in the past. I also think there's some opportunity out there with BTU Act for upgrading stoves. And so if people know what the BTU Act tax credit is, and if you're an organization, you're thinking about maybe, how do you help people access that tax credit in a way that they're not waiting to get that credit back, because I know that could be some hurdle for folks to be out of cash until the filing for tax season. That's a great resource. Also, American Lung Association, I know, has done change-out programs in the past. We had some great success here in Massachusetts. Our programs have wrapped up, unfortunately. But that's certainly the other side of it, is good equipment in the home coupled with dry, high-quality wood. I think of them all as legs of the stool, and they all need to work together. John's got a question about, are the reasons why utility of tree service did not drop off wood other than the distance they have to travel? Yeah, I think for some, it may just be logistical hurdles. If they have to make an extra stop or something like that, they may elect to just put that into their disposal yard. We have mulching facilities nearby, and so that might be a reason for it. If they're trying to merchandise value out of that and they've already planned for that in their bid, that's a different situation than if you have someone who, you're at this table at the beginning. So sometimes, we have thinning cycles here for utilities every 4 years. And so if you're at the start of that conversation with the utility arborist, then it's easy to plan for it, versus if the contractor's already planned to move that stuff, then don't expect them to kind of change midway. But it's really about personal relationships with the utility arborists and the folks who are working in that wood, and building that relationship so that they see you as a resource. for when they need a place to put wood, and everyone feels good about that story.
Thank you. Yeah. And Jake, thanks for those links that you're putting in the chat. That's awesome. There's another question about wood tailings and whether there's any way to utilize that waste on I'm sure that's a concern out west for fire hazard and also just a question of what to do with the waste, how to manage your yard.
Are you referring to like leftover, like small pieces?
I'm assuming, yeah, that wood tailings, chips and sawdust and branches and that whole 9 yards.
Yeah, we here don't really have to worry too much about anything left over. I mean, people will take everything and anything. I know Navajo and Hopi people use a lot of sawdust and chips for soil amending, horse bedding, you know, around the farm, stuff like that. So definitely everything fiber gets used pretty close to 100%.
Yeah, I think what happens is that if something gets rotted, then we have an issue, and we just have a kind of a compost pile at each of the yards. And yeah, there will be a point where that needs to get ground down and put into mulch. And if we can coordinate that with the work that's already being done, that's useful. I think even with pretty poor, I would argue poor feedstock coming in, you're still able to get 90% of the volume out in 16-foot lengths. And so then you have kind of these offcut piles, and we have, a lot of times we just let people take that for free. Sometimes volunteers take that home and for chunks for them. And sometimes we have folks that have an old cook stove or something like that where they want shorter lengths. And so sorting that out, I think, has some benefit. It's just a question of unitizing it and moving it efficiently. And that's, keeping it not messing up your system. We mostly stack our wood in racks, so we really like to have 16-inch lengths, and we like to sort that stuff out. And that's so that we can dry and deliver as much volume as possible to people.
And how do you, I don't see any open questions here. Sorry, give me a second. For transport, what are the biggest challenges for, I know in some cases it's distance, in some cases it's trucking. What are the biggest challenges for transportation, and how do you deal with forest pests that might be hitching a ride? How do you think about that? To both of you, either of you.
Would you like me to go, Sean, or you want to?
Sure, yeah, I'll let you go first. There.
Cool. So from our standpoint, I guess first question would be, bugs and pests and all that stuff. We don't necessarily have a very big concern when it comes to that, mainly because the reservation doesn't have any trees, really. You know what I mean? So we're transporting pine up to a place where the trees that they do have is going to be juniper, and it's very small. So there's not, that crossing of insects is not that much of a concern. There are areas on the eastern portion of the reservation that's more wooded, and we just got to be careful on that and just helping people identify areas on the reservation where they can get wood. So yeah, we're not spreading anything. As far as the distribution goes, so Colorado in particular, and the steeper Rocky Mountain states, they're loggers. I can't speak to the Northeast or the East Coast, but they have self-loading log trucks. So you got one vehicle that just kind of can load up the logs, deliver them, and unload them. Here in Arizona, we don't really have those, and so that's the very expensive portion. This one project that we have, we paid the logger to deliver 40 loads of Doug fir logs that are like 25 inches and greater around and 30 feet or longer. And they use these for what's called kivas. They're like a ceremonial building. And so he's going to deliver 40 loads of that out to several different locations on Hopi, but he's going to have to bring a loader out there and leave it on site. And so like, you know, a piece of iron, when it's not working, you're costing, you know, you're losing money. So they got to charge us just for that downtime. So he's going to wait until he's got 40 loads ready, and then he's just going to go, you know, best he can. But that's really, since the inception of this program, that's been the number one difficult hurdle to jump. You know, and now a lot of these projects that are coming up that are out year projects that, you know, that we're planning to have a firewood portion of it. We're planning to do like in woods processing. So we have these large firewood processors, you know, that'll just be sitting at a landing, and they'll get processed. They go up in like a little elevator and get dropped into the back of a side dump truck, and then just sent out, you know, with, like I said, 10 to 20 cords inside it. And that's kind of that's definitely what's the most efficient. And then the other kind of like sidecar to that I try to like use to the naysayers who don't like the program is that, you know, when we're able to deliver one load of like 16 processed cords, you know, to one location, that's 30 vehicles, you know, that don't have to drive from a village on Navajo all the way out here and back and forth to get all that wood. So like, it looks like a lot of money when we're spending $2,100 a load. That is a ton of money, especially to the federal government. But think about what we're not doing, and think about what we are doing, you know. And so there's all this stuff dealing with the wildfire crisis strategy and how, you know, an ounce of prevention, you know, is worth whatever, but getting it off the landscape, getting it processed, getting it controlled and delivered to a place where it's needed is, to me, it's pretty easy to justify.
I think our, you know, biggest hurdle we do have like self-unloading log trucks. The money's been made by keeping the road open and keeping the power on. And so we're really lucky that that's paying for the wood to come to us. So that's a huge advantage. Again, there's problems with, you know, you get all different sizes of wood. And so that's a challenging headache for processing it. But the other thing is that the trucks that run around here are what they have a brush body, and so there's a lot of weight in sheet metal in that truck, so they can't load as much wood as someone would that's running the conventional self-loading log truck that's moving logs out of the forest. So that's just like one little hurdle. And certainly where we are, you know, not every bridge is rated for these trucks, and so making sure that the delivery yard has good access is really important, and that there's enough space for that truck to come in easily, offload, turn around, come back out. And that's key. If you can set that yard up in such a way that it's easy in, easy out. And that's why we love using these former landfill sites, because they're set up for trucking. And it makes a lot of sense. It's easy, it's flat, they can unload, keep going. That reduces their time. And we definitely want to make sure one of those big trucks doesn't get stuck. Because first time one of those big trucks gets stuck is the last time wood gets delivered to that yard. So just making sure that where it has gravel, it's well maintained is great. And we have relationships with the local DPWs to plow the sites. That's key, so that we can run through the winter. We try not to run in the winter, but obviously deliveries happen in the winter for logs. And that's key, just to have that access there. And then there's kind of two classes, right? There's this big commercial trucks, and then a lot of distribution work we're starting to see gets done with under CDL trucks, so smaller trucks that people are driving with a regular driver's license. And so the logistics of that are a little bit complicated, in that you want to max out how much payload you have, but it's easy. You can have a lot of drivers, which is great, but you're just not moving that much volume. It's really hard to move more than, like, you know, 1.5 quart green on a weight limit that we have here in Massachusetts. You know, I think we get under 10,000 pounds, you know, 5 tons is what you can do in a trailer. So that sort of logistics is a challenge. We've also done this thing where the wood's close enough to everyone that if it can sit on a site and then people can come get it themselves, that's how we worked around some of the delivery challenges. And we have a finite amount of labor. So by keeping wood in a shed that someone can access, and we have all these numbered sheds. So, you know, a person gets shed number 3 and they can come drop off their trash and then fill up the back of the trunk of their Honda Civic, you know, a couple times, That's how the wood gets out of there. It's not that space efficient, so we're kind of working through that as where wood banks grow. But that's kind of some of the flavor of what we're doing there, transport wise. And I love the semi concept. And the other thing too is you just got to make sure those trucks have self unloading capability of a walking floor to get the wood out. But we found that you can only get, at least with hardwood, we can only get 10 cords on a truck. And at that point, that's a really expensive truck for our little dump trailers that can do, a cord and a half, and they don't need a CDL. So in some instances, we could hire, college students in the summer to make deliveries, and that seems to work with the infrastructure we have for getting to homes.
Nice. We have a couple of minutes left, but I was just thinking, I'm sure the logistics are rewarding when they work out, and a good challenge for both of you for this kind of work. But I'm curious if there is something else that you would point to that is the reason that you continue to do this work and that you started out doing this work. What keeps it exciting, or what keeps it rewarding for you?
I would say for me, I mean, it just is, to me, it's a no-brainer, right? Like what the federal government doesn't often do things that make a lot of sense, and specifically with policy, and this does, and it's just kind of, it's very cool to be a part of it. I mean, the partnerships and getting to meet all the different people, I got the ability to go split a cord of firewood last year for a Navajo code talker, a 105-year-old Navajo code talker. I got to share some stories with him, and so it's stuff like that it's just like, it's very rewarding. It's very great to be able to see our forest and our natural resources get protected, and then to get that wood utilized. I mean, I've burned thousands of piles in my life, and that has a sense of satisfaction, but not when you're heating someone's home that this is their indigenous lands, and we're able to provide them with the wood, and and we're doing it all together. Everyone's helping each other out. It's just it's great to be a part of.
Yeah, I think I got interested in this really because we're surrounded by forests, and so many members of our community are disconnected from the forest, and so I saw it as an educational opportunity to reconnect people back with the resource, and it's been wonderful for that. I'm a forester. I've sat in many wonderful lectures where we bring people out, teach them about the different parts of the forest, but you hit a different demographic with wood banks because we're getting involved in just the basic needs of communities, and so that's really a wonderful benefit. And then I see that it builds over time because we start with firewood, we start with that immediate need. And then I get communities thinking about, well, you have some saw logs there and we're cutting them up into firewood. Okay, what could we start doing with those? Are there other benefits to the community that we could get that higher value, out of the material? And so once you start doing that, then people start seeing their forest as the resource. And that's a huge benefit. And I've taken a lot of pride seeing that, we start with, keeping people warm, and then now we're starting to sell logs to local artisans in the communities. And that's kind of nourishing those wood bank operations, and how it grows over time is really exciting. So I think that's a big key why I keep doing this. It's also this whole national wood bank enterprise has just been amazing to see grow. And that gives me a tremendous amount of pride to be somewhat involved with that, and in a small capacity. And it's great to meet everyone and see how everyone is connecting to their forest.
Well, thank you both so much for sharing your knowledge and talking to us a little bit, and answering so many questions. I appreciate your time and the work that you're doing. And I'd like to thank also our partners in the National Wood Bank Project, including the two of you, and your organizations, funding from USDA Forest Service, the Alliance for Green Heat, a couple of members of whom I saw in the attendee list here, University of Massachusetts at Amherst, Harvard Forest, and the University of Maine Media Services that have been helping us out in the background. And we'd love to hear how you all found this webinar, and to have some feedback from you about what we can do better in the future, and what other topics we can cover that you'd be interested in. There was a question about access to the recording. You will absolutely have access to that. I will send it out as soon as I get it. And I can definitely share what's in the chat box. I see that question from Rosetta right now, so that you can have all of the resources that our panelists, our speakers have shared today. So thank you so much. I appreciate your time, and thanks for joining us. Thanks, Jake and Sean, and thank you all for attending.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care. Thanks.